Well, I said at the time that I had serious concerns, and I said that in opposition. And I asked the government to publish a summary of their view. Look, in coming into office, under our rules, I'm not allowed to see the advice that went to the previous government, because you start afresh as a new government. But what I did on day one was I asked for the assessment. It's a detailed, complex, serious, sober process. It's a quasi-legal process, of course. And it's a process really to determine, and under our legislation, which was actually the Conservative, the last government refreshed in 2021, you examine whether there is a clear risk that there may be a breach of international humanitarian law. And on the issue of humanitarian access, this is a vexed issue that all of our allies have been raising now over many, many months. I think the public can see for themselves that there are real issues. Polio now setting in.
But that begs the question for us, doesn't it? Why didn't you go further? If it is your view that an ally of the UK might be a very real risk that it's committing what amount to war crimes, why only suspend 1 in 10 arms licenses? Because isn't the risk still there then that the UK is potentially facilitating?
Let me be absolutely clear. It's not my job to act as judge and jury. That is a job for our international courts. It's my job to examine our export licensing regime against our laws, which is about a clear risk. And in making that assessment, regrettably, and I do, it's in sorrow. It's, Israel is a close ally. We've always been clear that Israel has a right to defend itself within international humanitarian law, and regrettably, we had to make this decision, and the decision is to suspend those licenses that we know could be used in Gaza. That represents the 10%.
But you are still allowing the UK to continue exporting arms to a country where, by your own admission, there might be a very real risk that that country is committing war crimes.
Look, our assessment's based on what is happening in Gaza. We have to recognise that Israel is in the toughest of neighbourhoods. It had Iran firing missiles. If they had landed on Tel Aviv, or on Jordan, by the way, this would have caused tremendous loss of life, and we would have seen a massive, wider escalation of this crisis. So the reality is that we have Iran firing missiles very recently. We've got Hezbollah firing rockets. Hamas is still firing rockets, and we've seen what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea, recently destroying a Greek oil vessel just over the last few days. So let us recognise, of course, that the focus is on Gaza, and quite rightly, the international humanitarian law in relation to Gaza. And we have suspended the licenses in that theatre of conflict, and that was the right thing to do.
Can I ask you about the timing of it? The Chief Rabbi said this week it beggars belief that you made that announcement quite literally while the funerals of 6 Israeli hostages that were murdered were taking place. Former head of MI6 has told LBC this morning the timing could have been better. You could have waited a day or two, couldn't you?
Oh, look, I mean, my heart breaks for those families. Anyone who looks at the faces of those beautiful young people who were so savagely murdered in cold blood. I have the deepest condolences for those families. I've now been to Israel, I think 4 times since October the 7th. The level of trauma and heartache in the country is tremendous, so I do recognise that. This is a process, it's a quasi-legal process, and it's important that I follow that process. And there's a lot of scrutiny on the process, quite understandably, and I couldn't be in a position where I didn't follow the course of that process, and I'm afraid it was the process that determined the date and the reporting to Parliament. And as my colleague, the Defence Secretary, said, there's no good day.
How did you feel when you saw that, heard that criticism, saw that criticism from the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom?
Oh, look, I've known the Chief Rabbi for many years. We've broken bread. I've eaten in his home. I saw him a few weeks ago. I know the strength of his feeling, and I recognise his commitment, and I hear his disappointment.
But should he be commenting on something that relates to
Oh
export
look,
licenses?
I'm not. I have deep respect to leaders of faith, of whatever faith, and so that is for him. I've got broad enough shoulders, I think, to cope, Ben.
Can I ask you just about the United States reaction? It's the first time there's been a clear break between the consensus between the UK and the US on this. What reaction have you had from your colleagues in Washington, the Biden administration, since you made that announcement?
Oh, well, look, as you would expect, I have spoken to Tony Blinken about this matter. I don't recognise at all what is being said, and some of that is just complete.
Well, the suggestion that the Biden administration is unhappy with your decision.
Not at all. That's just not the case. I think we should. What the Americans have said, and they've said this on the record, is that they totally respect and understand our legal regime here. They have a different legal regime, and they make their own determinations, but they respect and understand ours, and they know that this was a quasi-legal process, and they've known that for months, in fact.
Two final questions, both talking about the United States. Joe Biden said this week that he believes Benjamin Netanyahu hasn't done enough to secure the release of Israel's hostages. Would you agree with that assessment?
Look, I think that there's a deal on the table. I really, really hope by now that deal would be accepted. And in the end, it requires leadership. It requires leadership on the behalf of Bibi Netanyahu, and it requires leadership on behalf of Sinwar. Let's get this deal done. Let's get the hostages that are now still there out. Let's get the aid in. Let's have a ceasefire.
Do you think he could have done more, Benjamin Netanyahu?
Look, I mean, I recognise, and you can see this within Israel, there's a lot of strife now. I've spent a lot of time with hostage families.
And they're urging him to strike a
deal. They're urging him to take the deal. They're urging him to take the deal. And of course I urge him to take the deal. That's the message I gave him.
Not.
That's the message I gave him when I met him. That's the message I give to all ministers. Take the deal.